A director whose next movie I'm always curious to see is David Fincher. With his distinct style and approach to tackling the darker sides of society, there's something about a lot of his films I find incredibly captivating. Fincher came from a class of filmmakers in the 90s and 2000s who initially made their name on commercials and music videos. In fact, many of them worked at Propaganda Films, a company Fincher had co-founded in the 80s, and before that he worked at Industrial Light and Magic in the photography department. So you'll actually find his name in the credits of movies like Return of the Jedi and The Never-Ending Story. This background probably explains the kinetic energy of his movies and his later embrace of digital photography and other technological breakthroughs. Now, when David Fincher jumped into directing feature films, it was not exactly smooth. His first movie was Alien 3, which became infamously plagued with arguments between Fincher and 20th Century Fox. That movie had already gone through several script drafts as several screenwriters and previously attached directors tried to figure out where to take Ripley next. Fincher was hired to direct, which is not that unusual for the franchise. After all, before making the first Alien movie, Ridley Scott also primarily directed commercials, and his only feature film credit was The Duelist. Fincher has openly talked about his disdain for how Alien 3 turned out and what he dealt with during production. But even with that, you can still see his fingerprints in places and elements that would become commonplace in his later work. This is a very grimy movie with its depiction of the space prison and the unpleasant people stuck there. It's a visually stunning movie too, with Fincher's cinematic language coming through. My main issue of Alien 3 is I find it just a little too mean-spirited, which maybe seems like an odd criticism for a horror film. But once the film kills off Newt in the beginning, leaving Ripley alone with the prisoners, it's hard to go back after that. Alien 3 marked an underwhelming start to his filmography, but did not take long for him to make an impression on his next movie, Seven. I think this is one of the best detective movies in film noirs, with Fincher finding the right approach depicting this hunt for a serial killer. Under different hands, Seven might have ended up a schlocky slasher movie, but thanks to Fincher and a smart script by Andrew Kevin Walker, it goes beyond that. It cleverly uses the notion of the killer using the 7 deadly sins and does make you invested in the lives of the 2 detectives following him. It even takes the familiar concept of them having polar opposite personalities and doing new and interesting things with that, further helped by Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt's chemistry. And it's because you grow to care about them, and the Gwyneth Paltrow character too, it makes later scenes leave quite the impact. What also stands out about the movie is how Fincher uses the city and pulls one into the rain-soaked roads and alleyways in the various apartments. And when depicting the gruesome scenes after John Doe's killings, Fincher does not hold back. So Seven is certainly not a film for the faint of heart, but rather than feeling exploitative, they show just how demented this killer is. Seven is also when we see Fincher's love of inventive opening title sequences, a common trademark of his movies that capture the tone of what's to follow. It's wonderful that after his experience making Alien 3, he was given the opportunity to put a stamp on this film and showed he had potential to be a major voice in filmmaking. Admittedly, I'm not as enthusiastic about his next film, The Game, which I find to be rather illogical, and the ending especially felt unearned. Even Fincher seems to share my opinion on this, although it's still impressively well made on a technical level, and Michael Douglas turns in a really good performance. It's more so the story that does not do much for me. Regarding Douglas and other actors in his movies, while Fincher is known for his technical expertise and the attention to detail he brings to that aspect of the production, he also consistently gets great performances out of his actors, although he infamously does this by filming the same take several times, which has annoyed some actors. Is it overkill to do so many takes? Probably, although Fincher has explained his reasoning is that it often takes a number of times for the actor to loosen up and provide the natural performance he's looking for. Of his entire filmography, Fight Club has gotten maybe the biggest variety of reactions. There are those who view it as an endorsement of male violence, while others see it as a critique. Some viewers consider Tyler Durden a positive and inspirational figure, while there are those who find him to be a villain. I'm of the opinion that Fight Club is a satire of masculinity, and we're meant to see Durden as a charming figure who has a negative effect on those around him. The men who join this Fight Club become drones with no individual personality, so are they really better off than when they were behind a desk or fixing cars from 9 to 5? Especially since they're now committing acts of terrorism. Fincher makes sure that these fight clubs are not ones you want to join by portraying them as brutally as possible, although that did not stop people from starting real fight clubs. Really missing the point there. Nonetheless, Fincher finds that balance in the dark comedy and the more violent aspects, and I do think this ranks among his best work. There's so many clever details in the editing, especially in depicting the relationship between Tyler Durden and the narrator. However one interprets Fight Club, it makes for an exciting piece of cinema that could almost be considered the Clockwork Orange of its era. With Panic Room, he went for something more pared down and showing a mother and daughter dealing with a break-in by some burglars. That simple premise is used to good effect as we go through each room of the house and we see the mother think on her feet, and it made for an engaging thriller. You may have noticed one common theme in his work is how he tries to dig into the mind of a criminal, and with Zodiac he sought to tackle one of the most famous unsolved murder cases. That film smartly focused on 3 principal characters who develop an obsession with the Zodiac killer. Fincher did an exceptional job of showing why these sorts of cases are so fascinating and showing the effect that this obsession of finding the killer has on a cartoonist, a journalist, and a policeman. Each spiral for different reasons, and Fincher makes it so compelling we become curious as to who exactly might be the killer out of the possible suspects given. Zodiac was also Fincher's first period piece, and his ability at recreating the late 60s and 1970s using the resources and technology available to him was quite remarkable. There are even entire shots in this movie you might be surprised to learn are computer generated. Meanwhile, there's a scene in a basement that's one of the most tense I've ever seen in a movie, as you share the same uncertainty and fear as Robert Graysmith, the cartoonist played by Jake Gyllenhaal. By the way, another common aspect of Fincher's filmmaking is his use of color. Green seems to be a favorite color of his, but he likes to use other shades too, and yellow seems to be a primary color in Zodiac. Just another example of the unique stamp he puts on his movies. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button makes for an interesting outlier in his filmography. David Fincher likes to make movies with a dark center and often lacking in sentimentality. Even when he includes romance, it can sometimes take an unfortunate turn. Benjamin Button, on the other hand, is more of a fable and the kind of sentimental story he does not normally do. Now, there is the ticking clock as Benjamin ages backwards, but at its core it's really a love story, albeit a love story where only for a few decades will the two leads be the appropriate ages to get together. Watching the movie, it does feel like something that maybe a director like Steven Spielberg or Robert Zemeckis or Ron Howard might have made. In fact, Benjamin Button went through several directors while it was being developed, with Gary Ross being one of the last ones before Fincher stepped in. However, he still did a suitable job of directing the film and telling this fanciful tale. You might think the technical complexities required to age and de-age Brad Pitt would be what attracted Fincher to the movie, but he actually said it was the themes of mortality and what happens when you already know what your ultimate fate will be from the beginning. So while the presentation suggests Fincher stepping out of his wheelhouse, it makes some sense what attracted him to the project. At first glance, The Social Network also seems like a surprising film for him to sign up for. A movie about the creation of Facebook and the eventual legal battles? Odd choice for someone who normally makes movies about criminals and the underbelly of society. However, at its core, The Social Network is a story about a friendship falling apart and deals being made behind closed doors, with potential billions being earned in the process, and all out of a desire to fit in with those in power. Another recurring theme I've noticed in a lot of Fincher's movies is characters who like building or deconstructing things. Examples include John Doe in his elaborate murder plot in Seven, Graysmith and others trying to break the Zodiac Killer's letters, and in The Social Network, the intricate coding required for a website. And that Fincher, along with screenwriter Aaron Sorkin, makes that all so compelling, shows what makes him one of the most dynamic directors working today. Even as Facebook continues to evolve and Mark Zuckerberg attempts different ideas and gets into more trouble, the film has never lost what makes it so intriguing. If anything, the real-life events since then have only added to the film and its depiction of how far Zuckerberg goes to get this social platform online and widely used. I admit the first time I saw The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, I was disappointed, as I did not find the mystery that involving. But revisiting the film a few years ago, I was able to better get into it, and Fincher was an especially fitting choice for a movie that takes place in the snowy landscape of Sweden. He handles the more disturbing scenes well, mainly because despite the subject matter he often delves into, as stated before, he's not an exploitative filmmaker. It's good that something that initially left me cold I eventually gained some appreciation for, and in retrospect, it is a little odd that Fincher was not given the opportunity to adapt the other books in the series. Although he's never directed a sequel to one of his own movies, he did express interest in making another Dragon Tattoo movie, and has sometimes been attached to direct sequels to other filmmakers' work. One of the most surprising was when he came close to directing a sequel to World War Z. That would have been interesting. With Gone Girl, he continues interest in cult characters, and in this case he made a film at how the media can sometimes paint a portrait of someone and create this image in the public eye. A key ingredient of this movie is the dialogue by Gillian Flynn, which has such a sharpness and wit to it, and that's another thing that stands out about Fincher. While he has never been credited as a screenwriter in his own movies and is known as a technical director, he clearly has a lot of respect for the words on the page and what the writer conjures up. When he was working on Seven, he made sure to retain Andrew Kevin Walker's original script and refused to use the rewrites done by other writers when previous directors were attached. While the visuals are a major part of his films, many of them are also dialogue-driven, and he has an eye for scripts with ear-catching conversations. You obviously see this in The Social Network and Gone Girl, but the dialogue is also key to Zodiac, Fight Club, and Seven. And with Gone Girl, we see how Ben Affleck's character saying the wrong thing, or maybe not expressing his words the way others like, has an effect on him. Fincher's respect for writers would prove fitting when he directed Mank, which centers on the life of screenwriter Herman J. Mankiewicz. His late father, Jack Fincher, even wrote the script. I find the production of Citizen Kane to be incredibly fascinating, so it's a little surprise I really like Mank. The way it cuts back and forth between earlier periods of his life and him working on the script for Orson Welles' first feature film is really well done, and again Fincher used his technical expertise to capture that era of Hollywood history. It digs into his character and the politics of the time period exceptionally well, along with Mankiewicz's friendship with Marion Davies. You almost sense David Fincher bringing some of his own relationship with the Hollywood system into the movie. While I had a rough early experience on Alien 3, he eventually managed to create respect and understanding for his methods and willingness to tackle the films he wanted. Although it's interesting Mank will be the first movie he directed for Netflix, where he seems to enjoy working with the amount of creative freedom they give him. Fitting for a movie about the only one Orson Welles was able to make exactly the way he wanted, with only a newspaper tycoon proving troublesome. The Killer did seem to go under the radar a bit, which is a shame, as I thought this provided another electrifying film from Fincher. Like he so often does, creates a compelling portrait of a person who likes planning and plotting. This movie is also an example of something I don't think Fincher gets enough credit for, and that he has a sense of humor when the situation in the film calls for it. And there are a number of sly, funny parts, especially the way it uses real businesses for visual gags. But even though Michael Fassbender is playing someone with few outward emotions, you nonetheless see what a fully realized personality is and what drives him to go after certain people. Now, David Fincher's next movie marks a fascinating collaboration. It's a sequel to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with Quentin Tarantino as the screenwriter. Reportedly titled The Adventures of Cliff Booth, I'm very excited for this movie, and I do think Fincher is a good choice to tackle a Tarantino script. As clearly indicated, Fincher has experience directing dialogue-heavy scripts like the sorts Tarantino is known for, so I think he can bring his style while respecting what has been written. The teaser has definitely made me even more eager to see Cliff Booth and seeing what Fincher has cooked up here. He often tries to bring something new to the table, whether depicting criminal behavior or even a website creator or an alcoholic writer, and that has resulted in a unique filmography with, I'm sure, many more worthwhile films in the future. See you next time.